have a guest speaker before this class, but I think they're having problems with Zoom, so we're going to go ahead with today's class. All right, so let's get on with the show. All right, so now we're actually going to talk about anatomy and physiology. So what are anatomy and physiology? Let's define them. So anatomy, in a nutshell, is the study of the structures of your body, giving them names, knowing where they are. So it's basically finding out, naming structures, locating where they are, and knowing what they're named. Physiology, so anatomy is form, but physiology is like, okay, you know all these structures, you know all these parts of the body, how do they work? And that's where physiology comes in. So it's not just about looking at pictures of the human body, but it's also about knowing how the human body actually works. All right, so for example, say you have a mechanic, right? So a lot of you are trying to get into health professions, being nursing, for being a doctor, pharmacist, physical therapist. Well, what about a mechanic? So a mechanic needs to know all the parts of the car, right? Otherwise, they don't know how to fix it, right? So anatomy is like knowing what these different parts are, what they're named, where they're located, where they fit in a car. Whereas physiology is actually knowing how a car runs, how these piston cylinders work, why you need transmission fluid, why you need to do these oil changes every so often. So can a mechanic be a good mechanic by just knowing what parts are named and nothing about how cars work? Or can a mechanic be good if they know how cars work, but they can't name anything in the car or know where it's actually located? So you need both anatomy and physiology to be a good healthcare professional, just like how a mechanic needs to know not only what the parts of a car are, they also need to know how it actually runs. So this is why this class is taught in an integrated fashion. All right, so, oh yeah, that's a disclaimer. During this semester, you'll see a lot of the human body in various forms. So again, if you're going to nursing, if you're going to medicine, you're going to see a lot of people who are naked. There won't be like, I think this is the closest you'll see to that, but you will see drawings of people who are unclothed. And why? Because we're studying the human body, and we're not studying fashion. All right, so if you have Top Hat, can you log into Top Hat? So what we're going to do is try out Top Hat today. So before we get back to our lecture, so this is what you should do with Top Hat. So let's present this. Okay, so the thing is like, if you have a Top Hat account, please log into Top Hat right now. Log into our classroom. And I'm going to start to present a question. So what you'll see here is, let's go to our browser. So you'll see this join code. So I'm going to start a presentation, and this is the join code you want to use when it asks you to log into Top Hat. This one, so let's see how we responded. Okay, so as you can see, wow, actually like a lot of people in Hawaii, but we have a lot of people on the West Coast and some people in the South, someone all the way in Korea, and wow, is this someone of the like, well, I'm not even sure what that is, but oh, we actually, someone in Africa? Wow. So I guess they have the longest lag time. But again, this is one cool feature about Top Hat. So again, this is another reason why I'm trying to use it this semester. Okay, let's get back to our actual lecture. All right, so don't log out Top Hat yet. So this part of the body, so this is the left, this is the right, right? So you might be thinking like, wait, isn't this the right side of the body? Well, in the photograph it is, but when you're dealing with anatomy and when you're dealing with patients, it's not, in the healthcare profession, it's not about you, okay? I know some people think it's all about them, but it's about the patient, not about you. So in anatomical directions, it's always about the patient's left and always about the patient's right when you're talking about left and right. It's not about how you're facing them, your left, your right. So I think I have no experience in theater, but some students and some of my friends in theater says it's kind of like stage left, stage right. You're the audience, you're looking at the stage, but it's not, so what you are, you're looking at your patient. It's about if they're feeling it in their left or right side of the body. So again, this is something you kind of have to do mental gymnastics at first, and it will confuse you eventually, because whenever I go on like Instagram, and my friends like, oh, the person I'm dating is to my right. I'm like, oh shoot, is they talking about their anatomical right or the photograph right? So I usually ask them, oh, you mean the person wearing the purple dress? But yeah, so when you're dealing with anatomy in this class, you're talking about the patient's left and right. Okay, so let's go with another top hat question. Who among these people is most likely to be single? Fine. Okay, so let's see what people said. And most of you think person C is single, but okay, looks aside, because it was really funny. Like last year, we had someone had a very interesting deduction just based on looks. But here's the what are they all wearing? They're at least wearing a flower, right? So this is a local custom. So where you wear your flower also can indicate if you're single or not. So notice that person A and person C, they both have flowers in their left or right. Again, it's about anatomy, it's about your patient. So they have a flower on their left ear, right? Or left ear, correct? Whereas person D has a flower in her right ear, and person B has flowers all over up in here. So a local custom is like if you're single, well, you might wear your flower, your pua, on the right side. And why does left mean that you're probably taken? Because this is the answer that most people give me, is that if your flower is on your left side, that means you're taken because the left side is closer to your heart. So this is why person D, if you're just looking at the flower, is most likely to be single. So yay for the 6 people who got that correct. Okay. All right, so back to our lecture. So again, this is going about anatomical left and right. So what's the serious part about anatomical left and right? Well, this is why it's so important to know what left and right are. So what we have here, surgery mix-up surprisingly common. What are they mixing up? So what are they mixing up? Unthinkable errors, such as amputating the wrong leg or wrong limb. So again, mixing up left and right, they might say, oh, amputate the left leg, and somehow maybe the doctor or nurse, the surgeon's up having like a 48-hour shift, and they think it's their left or their right, so they end up amputating the wrong leg. And this is, I mean, or sometimes like if it's not necessary leg, maybe they remove the healthy kidney and leave the diseased kidney back behind in the patient. So this is why it's very important to know your left from right. In fact, this guy right here, he actually tattooed himself, a very short-lived tattoo, but it said, please cut here. But that's actually a technique that some surgeons use. They might use a surgical marker or even a small tattoo to label the limb or body part that's being amputated to make sure that they are amputating the diseased limb or body part or organ. So again, this is why it's very important to know your left from right. And again, it's about your patient, it's not about you. All right, so why left and right? Well, it also deals with locating. So not only do you need to know about left and right, but you need to locate parts in the body, right? So abdominal quadrants, what does the word or the prefix quad refer to? It refers to 4, right? So there are 4 quadrants. We're looking at the 4 quadrants. So you have your upper parts and your lower parts. And hey, what do? Just combine upper with lower, or upper with lower with left and right. So the left quadrant, that's upper, that's a LUQ, that's the left upper quadrant. And for the opposite below that is the left lower quadrant. And then you have, if you have a left, you have a right. So again, this is about the patient's orientation, not about your view of the patient. So even though this is your visual left, you're talking about the patient's right upper quadrant. So if they say they have a pain in their upper right side, they're talking about their right. They're not talking about how it appears to you. Okay, so there are 4 quadrants, but there are 9 regions. So quadrants and regions, I mean, maybe in colloquial use, they're kind of used interchangeably, but they're different in anatomy. And again, if you ever get confused, 4 means quad, and by process of elimination, regions, there are 9 of them. So instead of doing that like dividing into 4, Now you have a tic-tac-toe grid. This is why there are 9 regions, and they all have names. So as you notice, all the regions on the left of the patient start with left. All the ones in the right start with right. So the ones in the middle, they have their own special names, and the ones on the left and right, well, they have the same name across each horizontal region or horizontal row. It's just left and right. I'll walk you through them. All right, so what is dangling from this baby right here, or from their navel? This is what you call an umbilical cord, right? So where does the umbilical cord, or where you remove the umbilical cord, what does that result in? It results in your navel, right? So the part with the umbilical region is centered on the navel. So this is the center region of the abdominal regions. Whereas, so this is the stomach. So one prefix, or actually one root word that refers to the stomach is gastro, or G-A-S-T sometimes, just gas. But gast refers to the stomach. So this is what we call the epigastric region. So epi, so you might not be familiar with that term just yet. So this is what we call a root word prefix. So a lot of these anatomical terms, they might sound foreign at first, but they're usually derived from either Latin or Greek, and they have some root meaning underneath them. So whenever you see that prefix epi, it typically means above or outer. In this case, we're talking about, well, it's actually more on the level of the stomach, but we're talking about outer toward the stomach. So again, this region is kind of like on the surface of the stomach. If you go from the inside the stomach to this body surface, it's epi. And then you have the hypogastric pubic region. So hypo is, the gas is still referring to the stomach, but hypo meaning, whenever you have that term hypo, it means below. So hypothermia, low body temperature, hypodermic, below the dermis. Now with hypogastric, that means below the stomach. But notice that this part, so why isn't the hypogastric part right here? Well, it's already taken up by the umbilical region. So this is why this is also this part down here is the hypogastric region, already taken up by the umbilical region over here. And sometimes it's called the pubic region. The pubic region, hypogastric, those are synonyms, so they're referred to the same region. Now you have your left and right. So the left column and the right column of the regions, they have the same names, it's just left and right. So what do we have here? Well, now these are the hypochondriac regions, the parts that are on top, right? So what does chondro refer to? So chondro, well, we know what hypo means. Hypo means below. But chondro is a root word meaning cartilage. So here we have the rib cage, and when we get to exam 2, you'll learn more about cartilage and the rib cage and skeleton. So all this light colored part right here, this is cartilage. So it's kind of like it's approximating where this region is in relation to the ribs. So they said like, okay, this is kind of below the cartilage of the ribs, so let's just call it the hypochondriac region. Now this part right here, right below the hypochondriac regions, well, this is the left something region, this is the left something, or the right something region, right? So what is this region called? Well, this is kind of your lower back. So, okay, so this is what when I was first learning these terms, I had trouble kind of associating them and kind of like memorizing the vocabulary. So I came up with all of these, like, I kind of made these little jokes or little mnemonics to help me out. So I know some of you are probably cringing at some of my mnemonics already, and believe me, I have a whole lot more of them. But this is how I remember it. So to be a lumberjack, you need a strong lumbar region. So you need a strong lower back. So that lower back region in the middle right here, these are what you call your lumbar region. And again, just like there's a left and right side of your body, you have a left and right lumbar region. Now this part right below, so this on the diagonal corners, the lowest diagonal corners of the regions. So left something region, right something region. So what is that root word? So these are the left and right inguinal regions. So inguinal roughly meaning groin. So I know inguinal, you probably, if you've never had any like medical classes or have no experience in medicine, you probably have not heard of this term. So I was thinking like, okay, what's the mnemonic I can think of? Well, inguinal regions. So it sounds like iguana. So my little story is like, okay, iguanas are cold-blooded reptiles. This guy has 2 pet iguanas, but they want to be warmed up. So where does he hold them? He tucks them into his inguinal region. So again, this is how I remember it. So again, inguinal region, this is, if you don't like this mnemonic, you don't have to use it, but this is how I memorized it when I was first studying this. And now now you know all 9 regions. And again, why do we cover this? This is like if you're describing where a patient is experiencing pain or where they have an injury or wound. This is where you can help someone reading the medical records locate where that pain or injury is located. So again, this is why I also bring up these prefixes, suffixes, and root words. Notice that I was taking my time to explain what epi, what hypo, what gastro meant. So the thing about these root words is that often they're reused time and over again in medicine. So if you have a big vocabulary of these prefixes, suffixes, and root words, sometimes you might encounter a new medical term and make a good stab at knowing what it means without even having seen that term before. So again, this is why I kind of emphasize it. It helps you in memorizing and understanding for future terms. So again, some of the ones we covered, hypo and epi. And this will come over, this will reappear, especially when we get to the skin and integument. All right, so let's talk about anatomical directions. So here's a figure from Martini. So what you see is that all these arrows, and this is probably one of the weaker parts of Martini. It tends to throw a lot of information at you. It's a lot of information that's good for providing background, but sometimes it's a little overwhelming to take in at once. But I will walk you through all these directions. And this is the OpenStax version. I love her expression in this one, but it's a little more simple. As you can see, this is another big difference between Martini and OpenStax. Notice a lot of information where OpenStax tends to be a little more like streamlined and simpler. But so what are anatomical directions? What's the purpose? Well, you might be familiar with geographic directions. What are examples of those? Like north versus south, east versus west. Or if you're here in Hawaii, or if you made it here, Malcolm versus Mackay. So if you haven't heard of that before, you'll learn it, well, once we're out of this lockdown. But once we're out of this lockdown and you're able to travel around the island, Malka refers to the mountain and Mackay refers to the ocean. So sometimes it's easier to say inland versus toward the sea. This is our local terms for that. But why do you use that? Well, if you're giving directions to someone else of where to go, you might use these geographical directions. So, or windward versus leeward, that's another thing that's kind of specific to Hawaii, or not, well, it's more earth science, but we use it extensively here on Oahu as well. So anatomical directions, what are they? What's their use? Well, they're just like how geographical directions, you use these to help someone get to somewhere else, right? Well, anatomical directions help you to describe to someone else where something is located. So anatomy is like the geography of the body. Just like geography has locations, names of places, how they're related and arranged to each other, same with anatomy. So directional references. So what are the north, south, east, and west, and other directions of the body? So here we have left and right. That's pretty, yeah, as again, you should know this by now after how much time we've spent on directional references. But what is up and down? So up is superior. So I like to think, like we named this one year, so we named her Regina. So Regina thinks she's high and mighty. And I checked, there's no Reginas in this class. Apologies if you have a loved one named Regina, or if you are Regina. So Regina thinks she's superior to you. So she thinks she's so high-minded, her brow is so high, she thinks she's superior above everyone else. So what's the opposite of superior? So she thinks everyone else is below her feet. So inferior means below. So the opposite, just like north and south are opposites, up and down are opposites. Superior is the anatomical term for above and up, whereas inferior is below and down. Now, for here, what do we have? Okay, so we have cranial, and this means, so cranium is referring to the brain and the head. So this is toward the head. Whereas caudal is referring to the tail. So caudal is a root word, I think it comes from Latin meaning tail. So this is the tailbone, or the coccyx is the anatomical term for the tailbone in humans. So again, we don't have tails down here, but don't get too shocked by this. There have been documentations, or there have been photographs of people with vestigial tails. Again, this is someone's backside, not the front side. But yeah, you can look it up. Look up vestigial tail, and there are some people who have tails, like very small ones. But this is a tail, so again, so why is there? So this always comes up every year. Why do we have superior and cranial and caudal and inferior at the same time? Well, some of these terms are not exclusive to human anatomy. So if you have a dog, so again, the dog's head is going to be toward their front, right? Whereas their tail will be toward their back. But superior and inferior, the superior will be above the dog and inferior will be below the dog. So in four-legged animals, cranial and caudal aren't the same thing as superior and inferior. But in humans, they're one and the same. But again, what's the title of this class? Human Anatomy and Physiology. But for those of you who are confused why there are redundant terms, well, that's the other thing. There are a lot of redundant terms and alternate names for the same thing in anatomy. So something you just have to get used to. And this is another reason why anatomy is kind of tough. You have a lot of terms to memorize. Okay, so here's a midline. So we're going to split Regina in two straight down the middle. So what do we call the direction that goes toward the middle of Regina here? So let's call it medial. So it sounds like a median strip, right? Like in the middle of a highway, you have a median strip. So medial is toward the midline. But there must be an opposite direction, right? So the opposite of medial is lateral. So something away from the midline. So again, medial moving toward the midline, lateral away. So if you move this way, is it still lateral? Yes, it is still lateral. So again, it's not like east and west. It's just talking about in relation to that midline. So you can't have moving toward the left in a lateral fashion. You can't have moving to the right in a lateral fashion. So again, medial and lateral are opposites, but they all have to have an established midline. Now this is another famous painting, again, or drawing, the Vitruvian Man. But I like to use this. Why? I think I like it better than the book's figure, because why? Notice that he's a circle right here. So we're talking about this distal direction. So distal, the way I remember it is like he's pointing off into the distance somewhere, right? So if you're going away from the center of the body, or sometimes it's not only just talking about the trunk of the body. When we get that to next semester, there's also the use of distal in referring to something that's more distant from a structure than something that's closer to a structure. So distal can be approximated to the layman's term away, so distal means moving away from a center object toward the distance and the outer regions. Whereas proximal, that is the antonym of distal. So instead of moving away from a central object, now you're moving in a direction that's closer to and moving toward that central object. So proximal and distal are kind of like away and toward. Okay, so this is not a Hawaiian island. So last summer I was one of the study abroad directors for the nursing students to Ireland. And it's really cool, like this is the UC Dublin Health Sciences Service, not the UC Davis in California. But it's really cool. So then the Irish people, at least in one town, there's a town called Galway. And Galway, they have a custom, and that an Irish people who are from that region, they might advertise they're single by wearing something. Just like we wear the pua back here in Hawaii, they wear something that might advertise they're single. And then Galway is a beautiful town. If you ever, when travel opens again, but yeah, when travel opens again, if you have the money, it is really fantastic to see. It's a fantastic, beautiful maritime town. So they wear something called a claddagh ring. So I actually I got that as a souvenir back there too. So this claddagh ring, so the way you wear it determines whether, or it kind of advertises whether you're taken or married. So at least in Galway, this is the tradition. So what do we have here? The way it's oriented determines or signals whether you're taken or if you're available. So if the heart, this part right here, it has a crown, it has the hands and the heart, but the direction the heart is pointing is telling you. So if the heart is pointing toward your heart, is proximal, that means your heart is taken and is closer to your heart. Whereas if you flip that ring around and point it the other way around into the distance, that means your heart is out there for you're broadcasting your heart. You're available and willing and single. I know you're learning a lot about dating right now, right, in this class. But yeah, pointing distal is single. But again, this is like toward or away. Okay, so another directional reference. I would use top hat, but we're running out of time. So what is this fin called? The part that's sticking out of the water. This is called a dorsal fin, right? So just like you wear that, so the dorsal part is on the back of the dolphin. So the posterior, and the thing is like, or which part of your body do you sit on? The anterior or posterior? You might have heard someone say, oh, you sit on your derriere, you sit on your posterior. So the posterior is your back. So in terms of your anatomical directions in humans, posterior and dorsal are equivalent with your back. Now the opposites of posterior and dorsal on your back is anterior or ventral. So ventral is like, it approximately means belly, the belly side of the body. But anterior, so anterior meaning in the front, posterior meaning the back. Ventral and dorsal are also front and back respectively in humans. And again, why do we have these synonyms? Because in things like the dolphin, a dolphin's dorsum is towards this back right here, pointing up, and actually dorsal is the same as superior in dolphins, whereas its anterior is up here, so it would be facing the front, but the ventral part would be facing down. So again, but in humans, anterior equals ventral equals front, posterior equals dorsal equals back. And there's another term that's not quite illustrated in your pictures in your book. So superficial versus deep. And what do you have here? So here, say you have an arm, and don't worry, this is not a real arm from the anatomy lab. This is, I just looked up fake disembodied arm on the Halloween prop website. So if you pointed this toward yourself, like you took that cut off part of the hand and pointed it toward yourself, it would look something like this. So here you have the bone in the middle, you have all that muscle and skin on the outside. So superficial means toward the outside of something, so toward the surface. So superficial, the opposite of that is deep. So deep is also, sometimes it's called profound, but I think deep is a more common use of it in terms of anatomical directions. So again, you may have also heard superficial used in the colloquial sense, right? Like when you talk about someone's superficial, they're only concerned with how they look, they're only concerned with how, or you might have heard the term beauty is only skin deep. So again, your skin is your outermost covering, so they're talking about these people are only concerned with the outer appearance. Whereas if you have a deep relationship, it's more than just about your outer appearance. It's more about what's inside that counts, right? So it is used to a similar extent in anatomy. Superficial toward the surface, skin. Deep is profound. But it can also refer to superficial and deep within the organ itself. So superficial is almost approximate to outer, whereas deep is almost approximate to inner. Okay, and again, look at this. Even though this is pointing in a different, if you talk about vectors in a different direction, it's still moving toward the outer direction. So again, this is still superficial. It's just talking about, is it toward the surface or is it toward the inside? All right, so then we're going to talk about sectional planes. So as you can see, we have our model here, and she's being cut into 3 different ways. And this is what one big thing you should take away from this. Same person, but depending on how you slice them in this image, they appear differently in these different cross sections. So these different planes, these different rectangles you see that's dividing this poor Regina up into sections, these have names. So this plane is called the frontal or coronal plane. So this part right here. So what does corona mean? So again, everyone knows what corona means thanks to this, right? So when you hear corona, you're probably thinking of this. But what does it come from? Well, if you take Spanish or any of the Latin languages, corona means crown. So this is what the original meant. So when you have a crown, how are you wearing it? Do you wear it like this? Do you wear it like this? Or do you wear it like this? Or like the corona in an eclipse, it's facing toward you. So say you have a pageant or someone's being coronated and they're getting a crown. They face the audience, and then they get their crown placed on them. And they wave to the audience, right? So frontal or coronal plane is when you're facing someone. So this is what the plane is called. If it's facing toward you, that's the frontal plane. Now, sagittal plane, if you haven't had a medical class or any sort of anatomy physiology class, this might be new to you. So sagittal, this is the way I think of it. I'd like to think of it like, I'm subscribed to astrology, but whenever I see this astrological sign, Sagittarius, it's always a profile of a human horse centaur figure. So this is the way I remember it. It's always depicted from the side. So the sagittal plane is like a side view. So what we're actually seeing here is the mid-sagittal plane. So mid-sagittal plane is straight down the middle. But you can also go offset from that mid and go lateral from that mid-sagittal plane and get other sections. You would get more of her shoulder and her arms if you went to her left or right, respectively. But notice that in this mid-sagittal plane, you don't see the legs. Why? Well, there's nothing between the legs, right? But if you start going laterally, then you would start seeing more of the legs. But again, this is showing the mid-sagittal, right down the center of this model. And then the third plane is the transverse or horizontal plane. So what we see here is that she's being cut like a magician's assistant in one of those boxes where they saw them in half. This is what's happening. She's being sawed in half right here, but via this horizontal plane. So horizontal, again, flat to parallel to the ground. And transverse is also equivalent to horizontal. So the way I like to think about it is like bridges are horizontal, so you traverse across a bridge. Transverse is horizontal. I know some little like roundabout way of getting to the same way, but that's how the way I remember it. Okay, so then in our last 10 minutes, let's talk about anatomical landmarks. So we talk about directions, but often, especially if you live here in Hawaii, like if you ask, assume that your phone died and you can't use Google Maps or Apple Maps, and you have to ask someone directions to somewhere, and they say, oh yeah, go down that road and on the second right. Oh yeah, when you go past that big rock, you've gone too far. But after you go, it's just before the fire station, and if you see that pink house on the right, you've gone too far. You have to actually go back to the blue house, and then you take your third left. So the thing is that you have to combine, the point I'm getting at is that when you're giving directions, then you often give landmarks and the direction they should go. Same with anatomy and describing where something is located, like a body structure or injury or wound. You have to combine both directions with anatomical landmarks. And just like there's geographic landmarks and points of interest, there are points of interest and landmarks in your anatomy. So this is in both of your books, and actually, like, one omission in the Martini version is it doesn't talk about the coxal region, which is the hip. But yeah, so notice that a lot of these bold terms. Oh, and that's another thing. In my PowerPoints, when you see something that's bolded, that means I want you to know these are key terms, and often these are just one word. So they make really good flashcards, and these are like your basis of knowledge. They're not just the only things you need to know for this class, but it is good foundation for answering harder questions and concepts. So what we have here are many terms that you might not be familiar with yet. So when I was first studying this, what was my strategy? Well, I made different, I made different mnemonics, or I related them to things I already knew. So what is this guy wearing? He's wearing a monocle, right? And where do you wear a monocle? On your eye, right? And he's using binoculars. So where do you use binoculars? You use them on your eyes as well. Mono means one, bi means two. But notice that they both have ocul in it, right? Or ocul. So what does ocular mean? Ocular refers to the eyes. And there's things that some of the times these terms have roots that are common with terms that you might already know or use in your everyday life. Now this part right here, so otic is also referring to the ear. So I think it's not spelled differently, but I like to think it sounds like audio. So I think like otic sounds like audio. This refers to the ear. And so this was back, I know Olympics canceled this year, but back in 2016 you may have heard about the other virus, right? The Zika virus. And this is something that was causing deformities in pregnant mothers who were infected with this virus. They call this condition cephaly, right? So cephalic refers to the head, just like, so again, we have cranial referring to the head, and we also, or skull, and we also have cephalic. So cephalic refers to the head, and micro meaning small. This is, oh, this baby has a small head. All right, so this is a silly mnemonic. So this guy is eating, what type of candy is he eating? He's eating Mentos. So I think of it this way. He's eating, but he's a sloppy eater. And then one of the Mentos ends up tumbling from his mouth and sticking on his chin. And then when I think about it, okay, so mental is the anatomical term for chin. But why am I covering all these terms? Well, again, not only are they important for locating things in the body, when we get to the skeleton and muscles, sometimes and frequently, these parts are named after these anatomical landmarks. Oh, so this is, okay, which superhero is this? Or this was him before Endgame, but Thor has a mighty broad chest, right? So thoracic refers, or the thorax refers to the chest. That's what, and this guy right here, okay, he has really smelly armpits, right? So what is he using? He's using an Axe deodorant. I don't use that, but why is he using Axe deodorant? Because the armpit is the axillary area. I know some of you are cringing right now, but I got more of these. But again, this is also why I bring these up. The more ridiculous mnemonics work, the more they tend to stick in your mind. And if I get this to stick in your mind, mission accomplished. And oh my god, look at this guy's arms. His arms are so big they broke. In fact, what is the anatomical term for the arm? His arms were so big they break. The brachial region is your arm. And this is actually a very, okay, this is a silly one, but it's also a very important region. So what shape is in front of his elbow? This is a cube, right? So what is the term meaning in front? Posterior or anterior? Anterior. So he has a cube that's anterior. So the antecubital area is in front of the elbow. So why is this very important to know? Well, there's a special vein called the median cubital vein that's often used to give IVs or draw blood. So again, this is where it's coming from. A lot of the structures in your body are named after these anatomical landmarks. And umbilical, where does that refer to? Yep, it refers to your navel. Again, like the umbilical cord ends up as your, again, belly button is the layman's term, but we're talking about anatomy and physiology. Now down here to the lower half of the body. So, ooh, this person has painful wrists. And ooh, ouch, ouch, they've been typing for too long. So what type of syndrome do they have? What tunnel syndrome? They have carpal tunnel syndrome. And the bones there are called the carpal bones. And so carpal refers to your wrist. So like, ow, ow, my wrist, I have carpal tunnel syndrome. Carpal is referring to your wrist. And then palmar, you already know what palm means. But if you have like dirty palms, what type of labor are you most likely been doing? So this is what you call manual labor. So when you have something done manually, you're using your hands, right? So this is manual referring to the hand. And ooh, so they're counting in numbers, right? So this person is counting up. So when you count, you use digits. So you're using your fingers. So the digits are, or phalanges, these are your fingers. Now this is the funny thing. This is where we borrow things, and this is, or actually I'll get to that soon. Oh, what's over here? Oh, the inguinal iguanas, right? So again, inguinal referring to the groin. And what's this big bone called? You probably know this if you've taken at least like, I think even like elementary school, they let you know what a femur is. But that thigh bone, that's the anatomical term for the thigh. So femoral refers to the thigh. And okay, this is a really silly mnemonic. So I think of this, okay, you have this pans of pastelli stew, or if you have pans of paella on your knee, right? So why do you have the pastelli stew or paella? Well, I think it like sounds like patella. So patella refers to your kneecap. So this is why this is crazy mnemonic I have. And ooh, this guy got kicked in the shin. That's a really cruel act. So cruel, I think like, oh, it's very cruel to kick someone in the shin and the leg. So cruel refers to the lower leg. And what do you use to pedal a bike? Use your feet, right? So pedal refers to the foot. And this is where it gets interesting. So digits and phalanges. So why are they the same, called the same thing? Again, it's due to veterinary science and four-legged animals. So phalanges can refer to the fingers or the toes. But this is where there's one big difference. Your thumb and your big toe, they have different names. So pollex refers to your thumb, hallux refers to your great toe. So the way I remember it is that pollex, like when you pretend like your other hand is occupied and you're dialing the police, how are you going to dial 911? You're going to dial it with your pollex. Whereas I mean, if you're really flexible, you may be able to dial it with your hallux. But this is what you remember: dial the police, you're dialing it with the pollex. Or if you're local, so if you're spend enough time in Hawaii, you probably know the term hauna. So I remember this way: somebody's been jogging a marathon, and then what's happened? They have stink feet. They have hauna feet. So the hallux is hauna if you walked a long time or exercised for a while. And to wrap this up, I'll go over the other anatomical direction landmarks. So this is an acrobat, right? So to be an acrobat, you need very strong shoulders. So acromial refers to shoulder. And what fin is this? Again, this is dorsal fin. Dorsal refers to back. It's not only an anatomical direction, it's also an anatomical landmark. And this is one I need to kind of like do some like thinking about. So this is like your mom or grandma might use Olay cream, and say they have really ashy elbows. This gets very dry, so they're rubbing these Olay cream. So what are they doing? They're using it on their olecranon region. So the antecubital is in the front, olecranon is in the back, and there is a part of the elbow, the bone, the joint there called the olecranon. We'll get to that for exam 2. And then other parts, so again, lumbar region referring to the loin, the lower back. And this is another one that's kind of like, okay, I had to really think about this. So this is teal popcorn, right? So what happens? So this person was sitting down, they were eating this blue-green popcorn, and ended up in the back of their knee. So the popliteal region, I know, really bad, cringe. But this is the back of the knee. So this, again, just like patellar is in the front, in the kneecap, popliteal refers to the back of the knee. And this person is hanging 10 with their calves. So they're surfing and they're engaging they're engaging a lot of muscles, but right here, standing on the tippy toes, they're using their calf. Suro refers to the calf. And this person is planting their feet on the ground. So when you plant something, you're stamping the sole of your foot down, right? So plantar refers to the sole of the foot. And again, if you don't like these mnemonics, don't worry. You don't have to memorize my mnemonics. You may have better ones. But the end key point here is that, okay, directions are important for locating things. Same are with regions, with quadrants, and landmarks. So these are vocabulary you should start working now. And especially like flashcards, they work perfectly with memorizing these sort of things. So thank you to all of you who tuned in today, and I'll see you on Friday. Oh, and for people wanting to do office hours, I have to run moderator chat for another med school professor who's doing a lecture in 10 minutes. So you might see me kind of like dual wielding with 2 like devices during office hours. And if I seem distracted, that's because I'm trying to moderate a chat at the same time as like holding office hours. I could cancel office hours, but I'm pretty sure some of you have some questions. But if I do seem distracted, that's why. All right. Okay. All right. See everyone on Friday.